It's not really spelled out in the Constitution, but I'm sure we'll agree that it's extremely important. It is the MP's role as a leader, right? Um, Whether or not one is an office holder or just a backbencher, an opposition MP, MPs do have this enormous role in setting the right tone for politics and public life, and I guess for social relations in general. I remember Lee Hsien Loong saying, more than 10 years ago, that politicians have a duty to get the politics right, by which he meant acting with integrity, cultivating trust, and so on, right? And I'd like to quote what our colleague Teo Yu Yen messaged us a couple of days ago. To her, getting the politics right should mean, I quote, ethical orientations towards fair play, due process, respect for diverse viewpoints, the greater good, and so on, right? Which are all necessary to the work of building a democratic polity, unquote. So she emphasizes that these are not so much personality traits like how relatable or likable an MP is. These are, I quote, actual abilities and commitments to playing their part in a democratic process of making decisions that fairly speak to the diverse interests of Singapore society. So Anthea, is this a reasonable expectation that voters should have of their elected representatives?
Absolutely. I think this is not just reasonable, but critical expectation that voters should have. The role of an MP is really not just a political position. It's a leadership role, and leadership is a privilege, not an entitlement, right? When voters elect someone to serve, they're entrusting that person with a responsibility to act in the best interest of the public with, with integrity and fairness. So I do think that MPs must hold themselves to the highest ethical standards, because their actions reflect not only their personal values, but also the values of the society they represent, in this case, Singapore. I also want to say that the worst behaviors we tolerate from our leaders eventually become the standards we accept as a society, right? So I do think this is a very important aspect. Having said that, I must say that, it's also important to recognize that our leaders are human. They're not infallible. They will make mistakes. Then the key questions and how we judge them on that is how they, ethically handle those mistakes. Do they take responsibility for them? Do they demonstrate the sincerity and integrity to learn, to apologize, to correct course, right, when needed? So I think when we talk about ethical standards and considerations like what Yu Yan has raised, it's also about accountability, which is such an essential part of this.
It's not just about their own conduct and their private life, right? Because
No.
I often sense that what Singaporeans crave is a kind of moral leadership,
Yeah.
in the sense that, and we sometimes see this. So I'll give you an example, which would be that, say some preacher says something that is completely offensive to another faith, yeah? And it just makes people really upset, and you crave someone with status. You need someone to come out there and say that what this person said is completely wrong. It's not us. These words do not represent the best of Singapore. And you want those words to come out quickly, and to set the tone, to do this kind of repair work, in a society that has so much going on. When they do that, it's deeply appreciated because Singaporeans they know right from wrong. Yeah. And when there's stuff said that crosses a line, they want someone to come out and say better than they can why this is wrong, why this is acceptable. It needn't amount to a police report, or nobody needs to go to jail, right? But you need to set the standards.
Yes.
You mentioned Halimah Yacob earlier. I think she's a good example of someone who has, on occasion, done that in a very timely way, come out and just, planted a flag for ethics, right? And people really appreciate that. But in recent controversies, I don't sense that.
I think in 2020 that voters showed that they do not tolerate these kinds of things. So I hope whichever opposition ruling party shows that they are violating certain norms, they are scapegoating certain groups, I think ultimately the voters should be the referee and say, we reject this. We have our two office holders liking a post and liking it without any explanation. I would still like to see an explanation for that. Because that post, it doesn't come from a politician, right? But that post is not the kind of post that politicians should be liking. I don't care about social media influencers, right? But politicians, when you like and endorse those kinds of posts, it says something, right? So those are the things that I hope we stay away from, and I hope voters really pay attention to this, because voters did pay attention to this in 2020. I hope we see more of that.
Yeah, in fact, I mean, you're saying that the voters should and will have the final say. But the problem with many, like the incident that you mentioned, is a lot of damage is done in the meantime, right? So one of my fears about elections, is regrettable, maybe unavoidable, is that they are inherently polarizing, of course. Yeah. So perhaps if we didn't have elections, might have politicians doing things according to conscience. This is right, I'm going to support it. This is wrong, I'm going to call it out. Almost by definition, a polarizing context is one where they say, he's saying it, he's on my side, so I'm not going to call it out. That person is saying it, he's right, but since they're not on my side, I'm going to withhold my praise. And unfortunately, going to see a lot more of that. Yeah.
Right.
So the case you mentioned seems to be like a classic case of
yes.
where it demanded to be called out.
So hopefully, because this shouldn't be a race to the bottom, right? That what you are describing, Prof, is just a race to the bottom. Oh, my side, I'm not going to do it. And then another person said, yeah, my side does worse, I'm not going to do it, right? And then we are left with no norms. Now, what's the point of decorum and so on, right? But there is a point to it. The point is we don't want society to worsen in terms of polarization. We don't want rudeness, disrespect to be the norm, right? There is value in that, however airy-fairy that may be.
Mm-hmm. And to add to that, elected representatives have a much greater responsibility to
100%.
set those norms, right?
100%.
To maintain those norms.
Much more than activists, right? Like, so if you're going to call out activists for violating those norms, and I'm happy to do that, a higher standard should be held for elected representatives, government or opposition.
I think it's important, whether we're looking at the election context or any other debate, that there is life after that debate, there's life after the vote. So we have to ask ourselves, as we're in the heat of the moment, what kind of society do we want? Because that sort of willingness to go after each other, willingness to question motivations without evidence, that willingness to let ourselves off easy, let people we like off easy, that is what paves the way for greater polarization. Many politicians have complained and warned against that, and I suppose a lot of this will start at home in terms of their own behavior as well.
I'm going to end with actually sharing a very philosophical question from Balbinder Kaur. Is voting a right or a privilege? What is the difference between right and privilege in the context of elections? I guess I'm going to answer that very briefly by saying that legally, constitutionally, voting is, of course, a right of all Singaporean adults. But we know, including Hong Kong, where I am, we don't have that right to vote for our top leaders or for all Hong Kongers to stand as leaders, right? So perhaps the right way to put it would be that for Singaporeans, it is a right, and having that right is a privilege. And I hope Singaporeans will bear that in mind, not take it for granted, and make full use of it, play our role as citizens. So thank you so much on behalf of AcademiaSG for joining us. Thank you, Anthea Ong, Walid Abdullah, and Chong Jia Yen, and for the audience. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.